It's totally fine. I have a lot more stories.
That you do.
Yeah.
That you do.
Guilty as charged with the stories.
Hello, friends, and welcome once again to I've Got Something to Say. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. It's a little pet project of mine, something I do for fun, and if you get any enjoyment out of it, it makes it that much better. If you're new to the show, I just tell a quick story every week about some point in my life. Maybe it's funny, maybe it's not. That's for you to decide. Maybe it's poignant, maybe it's a waste of time. Again, your choice. So this week's show is called Hilarity Killed the Radio Star. Ooh. Now, when I went to college way back when, I had no idea what I wanted to major in. So I took off to Northwest Missouri State University in Maryville. Turns out they had a pretty big broadcast department. So I thought, I like to talk, so maybe I'll check into radio. So I took my first radio class, and I was feeling pretty good about it until homecoming came along. And I went to the homecoming variety show, and there was this guy who was a senior during my first year up there named Rob DeBolt. And I think he goes by the name of Rob Carson now. But he was Mr. Radio, Mr. Personality up at Northwest Missouri State. And he was hosting the variety show, and he was doing like stand-up comedy to kick things off and in between acts. And I'm like, this guy is so amazing. I could never be like him. I could never be Rob DeBolt. And it made me drop out of going for radio. I thought it was my dream, but the moment that it became the least bit hard, it hadn't even gotten hard. I just saw somebody that I thought was better than me, and so I tucked my tail between my legs and decided, I'm not going to do that. So walked away from radio, got a degree in speech communication, and then got a master's in English literature because I want to have degrees that don't help you get jobs. So fast forward a few years, I've had my first job outside of college. Not particularly happy with it. Don't know what I want to do with my life. And I think back to, oh, yes, I wanted to do radio. I'll never be a Rob Carson. Okay, I get that. I'm fine with it. But there's room for all kinds in broadcasting, right? Radio's going to do nothing but go up and expand from here on out. So I checked into different types of training programs, and I found in St. Louis they had the Broadcast Center of St. Louis. And my wife and I went down to St. Louis, stayed at the Drury Inn, which I think is headquartered in St. Louis. Nice hotel, great stay. And it came time for my audition, and I freaked out. And I told her, I said, I'm not going to go, Rhonda. Let's just have fun in St. Louis. And she said, no, we've driven all the way down here. You need to go at least audition. So I went and I auditioned, and lo and behold, I did good enough that they were willing to accept my money. So we were going to move from Kansas City to St. Louis so I could pursue this dream. But then my good buddy Paul called me and said, dude, we have an opening for a trainer at Sprint. I think you should go for it. And I decided, well, why don't I try it out? If I get it, then it means the broadcasting thing wasn't meant to be. And if I don't, then we'll go to St. Louis and we'll see what happens. Lo and behold, I got hired as a trainer at Sprint. Turned out to be great. I've had over 20 years working for that company, lots of professional and personal development, lots of great relationships along the way. So it ended up being a good thing. The bad part about it was I wasn't doing radio. So then one day, my boss at Sprint comes into my little office, and he says, hey, Chris, it's me, Paul, your boss. Are you bored at work? I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of bored. He's like, I am too. Do you want to be on the radio? Yeah. He's like, well, let's see if we can get on the radio. So I don't even know if the internet was invented back then, Paul. Did we get a phone book? How did we start looking up radio stations?
I think I looked on the internet.
Okay. So I bet the Google wasn't around. We probably got on Alta Vista or Dogpile or
Ask Jeeves.
Ask Jeeves. That was it. And we started looking up radio stations, and we called KOKO in Warrensburg, Missouri. Now, did you have history there?
The only history I had is I went to college in Warrensburg.
Okay, so you had not been on that station.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So we look it up. We call and we talk to Woody, whose last name I don't remember. You probably do.
Woods. His name is Marion Woods.
Marion Woods, but he went by Woody. Yeah. So we called and we talked to Woody, and he's like, well, I could put you on Sunday nights. So I think we drove down that afternoon, right, to fill out an application?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, correct me on any of this if I'm wrong. So we drove down. We filled out an application. We must have really impressed the guy because we got the job on the spot.
Right.
And he said that he would pay one of us minimum wage, and then we'd have to split it between ourselves if that's how we want to do it, because they would only pay one person.
I don't remember which one of us got paid minimum wage.
I think it was you that got paid the minimum wage.
Ah.
But then we started going down. So we'd go down every Sunday night. I think 7 to midnight was the shift.
Yeah.
And they just had pre-recorded stuff beforehand. Right. And that's kind of, I think, what the expectation was. We'd come down, we'd get on and do live reads about the weather, and then record stuff and put it out there and hang out. But what you did for me, because you got paid, is when we get into town every Sunday night, we'd go through the Sonic.
Right.
And we would get cheddar bites and cheddar poppers.
Yeah.
Oh, they were good.
Delicious.
Yes.
Especially in Warrensburg.
Sonic was fine dining down in Warrensburg, Missouri back in the day. And we would get those and we'd go and we'd prep our show. Yeah.
And we started at the AM, KOKO AM. 1540?
Yeah. So we started there, had fun doing that, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Just did silly stuff. I think at first we tried to be good, and then we were like, let's have some fun. And we tried to do some skits and whatnot. But in that same building, there was the little crappy AM station that we were on. Mm-hmm. And this was olden times, man. You put like the 8-track carts in to play little stingers and bumpers, and I don't know what they call it in the biz. Mm-hmm. But then there was a nice FM station.
Yes.
And what were the call letters for that?
Kicks 106.
Okay, KXKX.
No, was it maybe 105?
I think it was 105.
Okay. Kicks, though, right?
Yeah.
Kicks Country.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in there, they had like a national show that was already recorded. And I don't remember what it was, but it would just play automatically. So we were, well, I guess they never told us to steer clear. So we decided, hey, why don't we go in there? So we started recording little blurbs to go in between the songs instead of playing what was already queued up in their fancy computer system. Started having fun with that, and then we decided, why don't we just take this live?
Right.
So with no one's permission, we started doing a live call-in show on Kicks Country, and much to my surprise, we actually got a lot of traction with this thing. Trying to think what all we did. We got to go to the state fair and drive a golf cart around and do remotes and interview people, and that was fun. We
had a contest where we actually had a sponsor. We were giving away things when people called in.
Yeah, I think like Budweiser picked up our show and bought a trip to Cancun that we got to give away because we had folks at Whiteman's Air Force Base. There was a big group there. And then just people in the community. We had a little chat room, and people would talk to us, and they would call in and request songs. We started doing little skits and kind of made it like a morning zoo, but it was Sunday night. And I knew we had hit the big time when big time. Derek, the big bad wolf, the morning show guy, caught wind of our show and was obviously listening to it. And I remember driving down. How did we hear? He was making fun of us on the air.
Right.
Somehow we heard that on his morning show. He was talking about the knuckleheads on Sunday night.
Right.
And how terrible we were, which normally I'd agree with, but I think we were pretty good on that show.
Well, then he called me to be on the air one time with him in the morning.
Yes.
He tried to, give us trouble and stuff.
Yeah.
Tease us like we're the knuckleheads, which we clearly were.
We were knuckleheads.
And things haven't changed.
But it was decent radio.
Yeah.
I mean, people liked it. We had a decent following.
Okay.
But then he made the fatal error of leaving a pair of his pants in the studio one time. You remember that?
I do.
They had to be like a 60-inch waist. Mm-hmm. My goodness, those pants were huge. So then it turned into this back and forth where we would do these skits making fun of him, and he would make fun of us, and it became a really fun. It was like the first time and maybe the only time I've been in a radio war.
Yeah.
It was like Stern versus Opie and Anthony kind of stuff.
Exactly like that.
Yes.
Sure.
Oh, God. And we've done a lot of radio shows together over the years, but I think that was probably our best one.
Best.
Or most fun, I guess I would say. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And this went on for several months. I was trying to think today how long we did it, and I don't know. Was it a year?
Yeah, it was a year.
Okay. So it was a year, and it got to the point where we had enough of a listenership that the radio station itself was making promos for us and playing promos about our show, Sunday Night Radio Fun Time, I believe it was called. Mm-hmm. And we'd always drive down and we'd listen to what was playing before we came on because we had an hour in the car, and we'd hear our promos and stuff.
Well, you won't mind it that one of the things that we did was that you would interview the morning guy, Derek Wolf.
Yes.
And we would play music in the background. I don't know if you remember that or not.
I do.
Look at that. There's those little piggies. Of course, pigs.
I don't know if we can get it here. But then I would imitate him.
Yes.
But I'd always be eating chips.
You would always have a mouthful of Pringles as you were talking. There it is.
That's what we would play.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Just a subtle "Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf?"
Yeah. And then I would interview you, and you would eat chips, which I think was your favorite part of the whole bit.
I do love chips.
And then we threw in other bits, like we did Manly Pointer, doing the weather. The one that got us in trouble, we did a preview of the upcoming fall television season.
Right.
And we were talking about how all these new shows just seem to be knockoffs and imitations of old shows. And I don't remember exactly what got us in trouble, but I don't think it was anything super bad, right? What was it?
Well, instead of the TV show Touched by an Angel, it was Touched by a Pedophile.
Right.
That was your joke.
Yeah, which was... I wish it was a funnier joke now that you say it. I wish it were more funny. But there was something else you did, too, that was a little... I don't want to say off color. I don't remember that.
Was me.
It was. But anyway, the guys that owned the station were the Bick brothers, who apparently... were very conservative, fundamental, evangelical, if you will. And this was a pre-Trump world, so if you were evangelical, you didn't like the off-color type stuff. That was not okay. So apparently they heard our show at the most inopportune time, as we were talking about the great new show, Touched by a Pedophile. And I remember we were driving down... listening, and we're not hearing the little promos for our show. And I think I said to you, Paul, I think we've been fired. And you're like, no, we haven't. Like, dude, I think we have. And I was almost like giddy thinking about it, because every good radio personality has been fired at some time, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you build your career in radio. You get fired, and then you move on to the next bigger thing, and then you get fired, and you move on to the next big thing. And we got down there, and sure enough, Mike, and I don't remember Mike's last name, but the station manager guy was there, and he was like apologetic, but he's like, guys, I got to have your studio keys. Sorry. The Bick brothers heard what you did, and they weren't amused, and so we've got to take your show off the air, and I'm so sorry. Your show was great. Loved it. It was almost like, hey, good job. You're fired.
Right.
And I felt like, okay, this is cool. We've had a good run. We've gotten fired. Yes, we're each losing half of minimum wage, but this is we're just bending down to jump up to the next big thing.
But you said to him, what was it that did it? And he said, Touched by a Pedophile.
Okay, let's be clear. Yes. And the whole point of the joke was Touched by an Angel was a big show at the time, and this was just a knockoff of that, only instead of Michael Landon.
You were saying it was a bad knockoff. That you disagreed with it.
Yes, I did. Yeah. You can't do Touched by an Angel with Michael Landon and then do Touched by a Pedophile with Jared from Subway and think that's going to fly.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes. So we turned in our keys. We drove back home. And then it was going to be nothing but up from there. Now, the trajectory ended up not being exactly what I thought. But I will say, here we are, however many years, 20 years later. And we may not be in a fancy studio.
What?
We may be in your basement in a really cool podcast studio that's been built.
Thank you.
But by golly, I'm still doing radio, and I'm still doing it with my best friend, and I wouldn't want it any other way. So that does it for this edition of I've Got Something to Say. I'm Chris Whiting. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. And I hope that gives you a little bit of the history behind why we're doing this now and why my good buddy Paul is down here in the studios of KCTK Radio still making radio dreams come true. Talk to you next time.